What is up, guys? My name is Wumbo and welcome back to the Game Chat. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about something I found interesting after reading this article I found on WCCF Tech. Basically, Ubisoft's director at the Ubisoft French Studios was talking about the decision for console makers in the current generation to start having shorter lifespans between their console releases. And I think this really opens up an interesting discussion about, you know, with the Xbox 360 and the PS3, we had like basically a 10-year period where, relatively speaking, the console hardware was essentially the same, like for a whole 10 years. And now that we have Xbox One Scorpio, PS4 Pro, that life cycle has basically been shrunk in half. And so Ubisoft's head director at their French studios talked a little bit about what that change really means for the console industry, and I thought this was interesting. So what he said, I'm going to quote this first and then talk a little bit more about what I think about this. He basically said, "I think the way the home console industry is evolving is quite interesting. The main difference I'm seeing from the last generation to this new one is that the architecture has turned more into a PC architecture. No more of the PlayStation 3 being really very specifically designed and quite hard to develop on from the start. For us, it was a good decision for the major consoles to be more alike. We're going from an 8 to 6 year cycles, even 10-year cycles in some cases, to what we can already see is a 3 to 4 year cycle. I think this is the way the industry is going. For us, this is good because we already know how to handle these cycles on the PC. We're already facing a lot of different configurations for PC, so I guess 2 years from now we'll be able to launch new games that will be on the PS4, the PS4 Pro, the Scorpio, the Xbox One, but with no big differences. That's interesting, and that's also for us a way to push ourselves into more of a very short cycle, which we try to be good at here at Ubisoft." I'm sort of conflicted in the way I think about this. First off, having these shorter cycles does make it a little more comparable to the PC generation, and that consoles can actually keep up for once. So rather than having to wait 10 years and then sort of change what your console hardware is able to do, these shorter increments allow you to put out better hardware for people to play on, you know, in shorter distances of time. So that's obviously going to allow people to experience better graphics and a better overall console experience as these new consoles come out over a shorter period of time, right? But that does bring some major concerns. One other thing I want to get to actually before I talk about that is that apparently the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 now are having architecture that's less specifically designed to their consoles and more similar to PC architecture. So like in the past, especially with really, really old consoles, those weren't intended to be anything like computers at all. They were very specifically engineered in very unique ways, specifically for gaming purposes as consoles. Nowadays, the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 are looking more and more like mini PCs, basically. They're these little computers that just so happen to be running an operating system that Xbox and PlayStation create. For Xbox, that's sort of an alternate version of Windows 10, and then PlayStation obviously has their own operating system for the PlayStation hardware. So in that sense, having these shorter life cycles is allowing them to have to orient this more towards a PC architecture in order to allow developers to keep up. In that sense, I see that it's good, right? So, but what about these disadvantages? I'm going to refer back to part of this quote that came from this director because I think this really highlights the problem here. "I guess 2 years from now, we'll be happy to launch games that will be on the PS4, the PS4 Pro, the Scorpio, the Xbox One, but with no big differences." That's interesting, and that's also for us a way to push ourselves into more of a very short cycle. And then obviously he tries to claim that's something that Ubisoft is good at, right? So the problem here with having these shorter console life cycles is that developers are not able to pick up the pace and keep up. Now, I mean, you could argue that's the developer's problem for not being able to do that, but the issue is that when you have consoles coming in a short period of time and you're developing this hardware at a faster rate, developers are used to doing that on a PC because every single year new graphics cards comes out, new processors come out, and obviously they have to adapt to those changes. But on consoles, they're basically able to get into this rhythm where they can release on the same hardware with the same expectations for graphical capabilities basically over the course of 5, 6, 7, 8 years, right? With these changes, it's basically going to be forcing developers to have to adapt their hardware in order to be competitive with this new graphical capability. The problem there, that might seem like a good thing, the fact that we're pushing developers to be better. The problem is that it's difficult to say that they actually will make that change, because what's going to happen is people are going to be buying these new consoles every 3 or 4 years thinking they're getting better graphical capabilities, but developers are going to be forced to have to sort of shorten the distance per se between consoles that are launched at one time and consoles that are launched 3 years later. So think about it this way: the Xbox One and the Xbox Scorpio when it comes out. What this Ubisoft developer is basically saying, this director in fact, is that they're going to have to make games that are at least a little bit comparable to each other graphically between the Xbox One and the Xbox Scorpio. So even if the Scorpio, let's say, is 3 times better than the Xbox One in graphical capability, they're going to have to make a game that is less than that because they're going to have to make it able to be compatible with an Xbox One for the sake of development time if they want to actually be able to develop games in these short cycles. So the result of this is basically not much graphical change for the actual hardware change you're seeing over the course of this time. And even if you don't consider that much of a bad thing, the reality is that people are going to have to be buying consoles every 3 or 4 years just to be able to play with their friends that are experiencing these consoles in that way, who are upgrading in order to stay ahead of the curve with these consoles. I mean, if you look back at the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3, obviously you bought a console, and then obviously there were some little changes here and there, but basically you were playing that console for 10 years, and you didn't have to worry about these little changes that threw a wrench in who you were playing with, dividing the player base, and those are the kind of problems that are going to be presented when you have these consoles coming out every 3 or 4 years. Basically, the net result of all of this is really just more money in the hands of Microsoft and Sony, if you think about it. Gamers don't get a huge benefit from forking out this money to get a console that's only marginally better than what they got 3 years ago, but Microsoft and Sony obviously get paid for those console purchases. So at the end of the day, I'm not really sure where I stand on this, if this new change in life cycle is really a good thing or a bad thing. I see both arguments. I see it going both ways, but I just thought it was interesting, something I'd like to talk about. Especially, I'd like to hear what you guys think in the comments, whether you are a fan of having these consoles that are just marginally better coming out every couple of years, or whether you prefer this long life cycle where you 100% know the player base is not going to be split up, you know what kind of graphics you're getting, you know you're going to be able to play with your friends constantly, that you're not going to be forced to upgrade a console just so that you can have the same experience that your friends have. Definitely leave your comments below. Let me know what you guys think. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and a comment, of course. Make sure to subscribe if you are interested in more of what we have here at the Game Chat. My name is Wumbo. I'll see you next time.